The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second part of a two-part webinar on what to do if I'm not working. Today, part two, we're going to be discussing re-entry after a gap or the case of the continued gap in your employment and work opportunities. This webinar is part of the Boost Your Career webinars co-sponsored by Sue Mentors and Tulane University. Today you'll be hearing from me, Sue Griffey, also known as Sue Mentors. These first few slides are going to be a review if you've already seen part one of this topic on before and during a career gap. I want to start with this because it's really important to remember. Pamela Weinberg says this the best of anybody I've read when I was at the Women Making Waves conference that Tulane University sponsors each year. In 2016, she said, basically just she used these words. There's a resume gap, acknowledge it and move on. Very positive and gives you a lot of ability to feel like you can take control because she has helped us all see it's going to happen in some cases. I'm going to skim over some of the information from the part one webinar before we delve into the specific types of gaps and tips and scripts for dealing with gaps. This is a view of how two people that I know have presented their gaps on LinkedIn. The red boxes highlight the transition of their work careers, where they were employed and where there was a gap. And you can see that they both put them up there and not tried to put anything in between the gap. Certainly on the right, this person didn't have anything for 6 months from July 2015 until January 2016. The person on the left called herself an independent health consultant for a couple of years. She also had been, you see farther down, a consultant for less than a year at another organization. That's going to happen on LinkedIn because you get a chance to put your information up there. But on your resume, you want to be very careful about covering up a gap with something that sounds like a consultant title. And there are many recruiters and resume writers who warn people not to do this. In both cases, the person on the left did not in the case of being an independent consultant for a year, almost 2 years, she didn't list the clients she was working for. In the case where she was a consultant and did list the client, it's clear she did work, but you don't know how much of the time she was employed from September 2014 to January 2016. And we're going to talk more about how you deal with the gap in writing and orally as we go along. The first thing you're going to find yourself doing is after a while in your gap period, whether it's for travel or caretaking for a family member, you're going to start turning more outward and thinking about my career, my work. I want to get back to it. I need to try to move on. It's update time. And update time doesn't just mean new hairdo, maybe new work clothes. You want to update your professional presence. That includes your professional documents, even if you're going back to the same job, and also your e-visibility, LinkedIn and other places, so people know that you're still around. We've talked before in the previous webinar about telling your story and the bio para that's going to be that writing a summary paragraph for that we'll talk about here. You'll see two resumes here. The one on the left will not pass the resume scanning systems that are now the way in which people apply to work. You want to have a clean, clear format for your resume. There's an upcoming webinar on applicant tracking systems, the do's and don'ts of it. So look for that and you'll learn in more detail about how you need to actually capture this. But beware of icons, like on the left, the phone icon doesn't mean anything. It wouldn't produce a contact number maybe in the database, the scanning system database where it needs to be. The one on the right has pretty clean formatting, no colors, black and white, and underlines are the big way to go with things. Good idea to take some real estate at the top to tell your story, what I call a bio para. You'll see a bit.ly link here at the bottom that is to a small set of instructions I have about writing 6 sentences to come up with a story that you can tell that weaves in your experience and skills using evidence-based and results-oriented language, but also then aims you in the job where you want to be going to. And this is important, not just because you're getting a new job, but also for things like in a promotion. How do you tell your story that you're ready to move on? So, telling your story, let's talk about what's important in the gap. We've already said acknowledge it and move on. And I recommended in the first webinar that you really should try to find someone who can act as a short-term mentor for you. Here's a sample script I put together, and this is helpful to look at in its totality because I don't mention the gap until the 4th paragraph, which is the 3rd or 4th sentence. Sorry, the 3rd paragraph. The idea is, how have you stayed engaged? And the previous webinar went over a couple of other webinars on effective mentoring, effective networking, and one called No Reply Is Anyone Out There, that will give you a lot of information about how you tell your story, how to effectively convey what you're looking for and where your strengths and your skills are. If you can show people that you're engaged, you're already that far ahead. This is something you can rehearse with your mentor. You can use parts of this in writing. If you're in a cover letter situation, you want to explain who you are, but also an achievement you've done. And you want to explain your gap in writing. You don't necessarily have to do it, but if you did, you would use the kind of information in this sample. But here are things that you can do as you're getting towards reentry. You want to start being seen. So if you can go out, actually physically go out, like to the bottom left, you'll see the event details for me in a Washington Evaluator's recent post. I could go down to DC and be part of the audience in a panel discussion. On the right, even easier, this came from Twitter, sometimes it's on LinkedIn or in your emails, is someone who gives a free event every month, and this is a webinar on Is Academia Right for Me? So those are easy ways to engage a bit, especially online. Attending webinars, it's a way for you to see what's going on, but you can also be seen by asking questions, and it is a form of networking as well as a form of updating your technical knowledge. Don't forget, too, to let people at your present job in a newsy way, let people know you're coming back and update people as you feel you can on what you've been doing in the last few months. One opportunity, this is now getting to the point where you might have more energy to engage than just quickly looking at LinkedIn, as we talked about in part 1 of the webinar. You might want to tell a larger story. So this person happened to write about a new chapter in his life, but he related that to something that happened that was a tragedy. He lost a brother a couple years ago, and he took some information from that, life's lessons, that he related to his work situation. And I thought, oh, that's an effective way to mix information that's more personal, but to use it to show your reflective practice and how it relates to your career. So here are some additional opportunities. But first of all, I would caution you, don't forget the reason for the gap. The gap was something else you've been doing. So if you have the additional time and energy beyond the step I just went through, which is one step beyond just updating yourself, if you can do more than going out in getting engaged in webinars, maybe what you want to do is put yourself out there. Present at a local university. Here's two things on the left that I've done when I've been down in New Orleans and I can get over to Tulane. Doesn't take a lot of time. In fact, the last time I was at Tulane, I sat in a desk with my Mardi Gras headdress on my, I should have put a picture of that maybe, on my head, and met with MPH students and talked to them about their needs. Don't forget about meeting with alums locally, whether it's through a chapter or just people that you know or even can be connected to. You may remember I mentioned Tulane Connect in part one of the webinar when on finding a mentor. It's also a way to find out who's in your geographic area. One opportunity LinkedIn offers, which is really advantageous to people, is something that I call LinkedIn Pulse, because that's the blogging platform they started with, but it's a blogging platform that anybody can use. And it allows you to present a topic which is your personal, professional perspective about something. And you'll see just the titles that you can see here, you'll see they're all different. This is not a referee journal article, and it's not, oh, what I did on my vacation. But I showed you, this is a Tulane grad, Lizanne Brown, who wrote a blog about something that she did as an evaluation activity in her work, has led to continued community engagement way beyond when the evaluation finished several years ago. And it's a very important activity that shows the effect of our work. So you have ways to show and engage your expertise by doing these extra things. And if you're in a gap that seems to be continuing and you're not getting, for example, you're not getting called back for interviews, or you're waiting to hear about second interviews if you're job searching, these are opportunities for you to put yourself out there. Because again, back to the effective networking webinar, you only control the side of the conversation, which is you putting yourself out there to get engaged, and can't necessarily determine when people are going to get back to you. So let's move on to the specific gaps that I've talked to you about and some tips and scripts I have for all of them. Oftentimes, the parental leave and extended travel are the same thing. People are going to be returning to the same job. So here's what you need to do. Usually it's about 2 weeks out, maybe a month out, depending how long you've been gone. You're going to email your boss and maybe your colleagues about your coming back to work. You want to tell people what's your return to work schedule. You want to tell them what you've done or not been able to do to keep up. And you will include in that email to people that you work with directly, I'm coming back to work in 2 weeks. I'll be working part-time, and here's my schedule, whether it's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or half-time morning for a week or a month, whatever. Here's my schedule. My calendar's up to date. You might say even, the first day is totally blocked out for me to say hello to people and read emails and catch up with team meetings, because I have not been able to get on my email, as you all are aware. Also important is to update your calendar to show those things, part-time reentry, for example. In the case of travel, sometimes you're coming back from a place where you've been 10 hours ahead of time, and your afternoon's going to be someone else. The people at work are going to be working in the afternoon. That's going to be the middle of the night for you. So you might say in the email, I've blocked out my calendar every afternoon to not have meetings, so that I can get through the first full week of jet lag without falling asleep on you in a meeting or something somewhat joking, but just to let people know that you've taken control of your calendar and what the reason is for it. Here's an opportunity, a gap where it sometimes feels like there aren't that many opportunities. So you're let go from a job and you're not working. And we saw these people earlier. Are you too senior? So there, a lot of times when these situations happen, I would say even when you get a demotion at your present job, these kinds of things go through your brain. Am I too senior? Am I too expensive? Am I overqualified? What am I going to do? People will oftentimes suggest to me the things that most recruiters that are writing blogs online tell you. They want to hide the age by hiding your degrees, when you got your degrees, how many years of experience. You can't do that. LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn, it's going to give the month and year you graduated from college, unless you put no college there. I had someone ask me a couple of weeks ago, why am I putting my MBA on when I'm about to finish a PhD in research and that's what I want to do? And she said, I did the MBA 20 years ago. I said to her, yeah, but it also shows that you have a lot of management and financial admin experience, and that's critical to running research projects and keeping a big research portfolio. The most important thing is that most of us can read a resume or even a full CV and say, I can figure out how old you are. I know what's going to happen. And by the way, there's a lot of social media out there. So even if you think that your LinkedIn is really controlled, you don't know what people are finding in a job search and seeing Facebook or Twitter posts about the fact that you went to your 30th high school reunion or whatever it is. What you want to do instead of trying to hide those things is instead focus on your successes and your experience. This is what we talked about in the part one of this webinar, and I mentioned a while ago with your resume. You need to control the storytelling, because if you don't tell your story, no one's going to tell it for you. And you'll see here again the link to the bit.ly link to the instructions for a bio para about what it means to try to weave a story about your achievements and your accomplishments, rather than people thinking that she has 30 years of experience and then she says she's got all these skills, but she's probably overqualified. Why would I want to hire her? You need to take control of that. And if anybody wants to reach out to me specifically on a script for this, I'll give you some ideas about it. There are different ways to handle it, but the most important thing is to go back to the sample script on how you talk about your gap and adapt it to a situation where you may be too senior or too expensive, where you really tell your successes and your engagement in your career and make people understand that they really do want to hire you. Move to a new location and got a new degree, have some parallels. This is a situation where you could plan for it, but you cannot always get your job on the ideal schedule of, I graduated May 17th, I want to walk into a job June 1st after I have 2 weeks of vacation. So this goes back again to the see and be seen part of effective networking. You can build up your LinkedIn contacts and connect with all sorts of people, but the important thing is going to be providing value back and being seen, as we've talked about earlier, with opportunities like LinkedIn blogging, presenting, making presentations, but even going out to local presentations and other events. I live halfway between DC and Baltimore, so there are a lot of universities and development agencies, and I can go to different presentations if I want to. If you're farther away from situations like this, don't forget what's online. I probably attend 3 to 4 webinars a week online related to evaluation and global development. They're all there and relevant for me, and I can see and be seen. And don't forget to use, especially if you're new alum, your alumni network. Everybody loves in alumni relations. People really like helping each other. So use the resources that you have while you're continuing to keep yourself engaged. Don't forget also, you've got to update your resume and make sure you have a good bio para. The caretaking situation's difficult because caretaking implies that the illness didn't happen to you, or the incapacitation, whatever disability, that you had to take time off and help out the family or someone close to you with. So once you come back to work, on your mind It's what's happening with my sick child who's got a chronic illness when I'm back here. Is the person that's helping as the caretaker at home now going to be able to do what I did for him? Oh, what if my father falls down? What's going to happen? Am I going to get notified? On the boss's side, he's or she is thinking, oh, is your mind back at work? Is this going to happen again? You can't answer things about what may or may not happen at this point. But what you can do is make sure that your boss and the workers your colleagues at work feel comfortable. For example, I know someone who cannot have a personal phone even in her pocket during a certain set of hours when she's interacting with clinic patients. She has a child who's a teenager at home, and she needs to be able to get calls in case something happens. What she arranged with was to have the school, if he is sick or if something else happens, his emergency backup contact after her is to call her boss, who's agreed to get a phone call to let her know that something's going on. What happens in that situation then is the boss and you both know that your mind's going to be fully present at work, and you're not going to be constantly checking your phone. Did something happen? Do I need to call in at lunchtime? Whatever. And this is important about understanding going back to a job, but also when you might be trying to interview and get to be hired in a new job. You've got to make sure people that you've negotiated some backup plans, but also that people are aware that you've made these backup plans so that you can fully attend to any employment. And finally, when your own illness or health, there's a health change for you, happens, you need to know what you are required to do and what you may want to do. So there's two situations. One is what if you're ill, if you have this health change right now, and one is in the past. So let's take now first. Legally, there's no need to disclose a health change or an illness, especially a chronic illness, until after you've had a job offer. But you may need to disclose it before, because you may need work accommodations. For example, sometimes I'll see a government related job, and it'll say something like work requirements must be able to stand for at least an hour at a time, 6 hours a day, which means it's got some physical labor in it. If you have to disclose, that's something that is your choice. Employers are not legally supposed to be able to ask you if you have any disabilities or any restrictions on your work. But let's think about the case where it's not a visible disability. You may think, I'm fine right now, even though I'm in the middle of a chronic disease. Or let's talk about also including pregnancy. On the other side, the person who's hiring you, because usually by the second interview, there's a hiring manager and HR involved. Your boss is thinking, how is this going to impact work if we hire this person and then they get sick again and need 3 weeks off? HR is going to be thinking, oh, this new employee is going to immediately put going to add burden to our insurance pool and put us in a higher bracket. Or if anything changes, which I hope it doesn't, in our rules about whether or not pre-existing conditions can be covered, this can also be difficult. But you don't have to, you have to work just like the person who arranged alternate phone arrangements, arrange to practice the discussion about you are able to do your work now. If you're fine, you're fine. I read recently an article on someone with cancer who said, I happened to be interviewing when I was just finished chemo, and of course I was bald, and there was no way not to talk about it. And a second time she was interviewed, and someone asked her about the gap, and she decided rather than saying she was taking care of a personal matter, she would tell them that she had to have some chemo, but she was able then to give them more information about this actually not being a cancer, but something that needed to be treated with some chemo. In the past, if people have had an illness such as a heart attack or cancer treatment, but you've been fine since then. You know you're fine, and if you disclose it, there's two options. You can disclose or not disclose. You may have people thinking in their mind, will it happen again? Is he at higher risk? Well, certainly if you had a heart attack and you're supposed to be picking up boxes in a storeroom 3 hours a day, that's a real concern. But if you're working at a desk, you're a knowledge worker like many of us, that may not be not going to be in the realm of immediate possibilities. Understand though, if you do disclose to HR and or your boss, those people work for the company as well as making sure that employees are receive treatment and equal treatment and care that they need. So they will be working with you on whatever you need, but they also need to let people, especially the more senior leaders in the organization, know what's going on, because an employee that suddenly gets sick again, or an employee that's in the midst of chemo, can boost up the insurance costs for the company in a particular year. There may be more sick days being used. The boss may not have the coverage at a critical time in work. So think carefully about disclosure, understand what you do have as protections legally, and also decide when you want to take control of the situation and share with people. Again, a caution, I mentioned social media a while ago. I read a couple months ago about a woman who was interviewing while she was pregnant, hadn't told anybody, she hadn't even reached 14 weeks yet. And the people said, you know, it's really critical. The first year of the job is important because we need to do X and Y. And she already knew she would hopefully be on maternity leave. They happened to do, the HR did did a Google search on her, and a social media post came up that wasn't even hers. It was from an in-law who was excited about having a grandchild. So if something's going to be affecting your ability to get a job, if you're going back to a job, if you're trying to get a new job, you might want to think about asking friends who are on social media or relatives to take off very sensitive or whatever sensitive information you feel is there. Just a caution, not something you absolutely have to do, but just to be aware of how this information can help you or also make it difficult for you. As we said early on in this webinar and in the previous one, the whole point of these webinars is for you to take control of your professional life and how your personal professional career can progress forward. So in summary, don't forget, move beyond the gap. It's there, you've got the gap, but what you're going to do is continue to reinforce the way in which you've stayed engaged during the gap. If you're in more of a continuing gap, make sure you get out of the house when you can, go to presentations. I put on the bottom left a picture of a mentor and a mentee, alums from the same university, who were able to actually meet up in person. And remember that a short-term mentor gives you a cheerleader. This is someone who's on your side, but also someone who's a trusted advisor. They're in your corner. They're not doing this for anybody else. The information's not going to go anywhere. It's going to really help you get through whatever your gap period was. Thanks again for attending this webinar. Don't forget to check out part 1 of this topic if you haven't already seen it. And we have a lot of webinars under the Boost Your Career webinars, as well as other professional development webinars from Tulane Alumni Career Services available on our channel for you. Please contact Sarah or me, Sue Griffey, for any information that we can help you with, or if you have ideas for webinars you'd like to hear.